Now, the moment of truth. Here we go, where the Big 12 schedule will begin. So let's see. We're looking at Houston's schedule, September 16th, the home opener. I'm trying to gauge. So I'm assuming that Grays are home, but I'll go ahead and go down the list. So for the Houston Cougars, the conference home opener, September 16th against Texas Christian. Then they're going to be on the road. They're going to see a familiar foe on the road September 30th against Texas Tech. They have a bye week on October 7th. Then a Thursday night game following that bye week. Dana Holgerson's going to see a familiar opponent October 14th, again at TDCU Stadium against West Virginia. And then here we go. Circle the date on this one, October 21st. At TDCU Stadium, the Houston Cougars will host the Texas Longhorns. Again, that's October 21. And then the week following that, October 28th, Houston will travel and have to play at Kansas State. Ooh, and that's going to be a bit of a tough back-to-back because on November 4th, they will travel up to Waco and play at Baylor November 4th. And then they finally get to see they're currently conference opponents. They haven't seen them the last couple of years, but then they host Cincinnati on November 11th, and then they close out the final home regular season game will be November 18th against Oklahoma State before closing out the first conference season in the Big 12 at Orlando against Central Florida. So once again, if you look overall the schedule, the first week of the season will be September 2 against UTSA. That'll be TDCU Stadium. They'll be at TDCU Stadium. They play Rice the following week. The first conference game of the season will be at home, TDCU Stadium against the college football playoff semifinalist Texas Christian University. And of course, when you look at kind of the big headliners, to me, the stick out TCU, Texas, Baylor, and Cincinnati as well. Cincinnati and UCF, just because they're old conference opponents. So they're going to be playing Cincinnati and UCF. So kind of interesting tidbit. They're playing both teams that are traveling to the American Athletic Conference schedule with them in that first season. So Dayon, just wrapping your head around that, what games stick out? I think obviously that Texas game's got to stick out. What are your initial reactions, initial thoughts to that conference schedule?
Initial reactions. I love that Houston is having some of these games on campus. I think it's apparent and it's important that they have some of those matchups at home on campus at TDUC Stadium. And so some of the matchups that stick out to me, of course, TCU. But like just to go outside of the Texas schools, because I think with all of us being from Texas and in Texas, we're anticipating those matchups. But I want to see that Kansas State game. That's on the road. Kansas State is a consistently good team year in, year out. That's going to be a tough contest. I think if Houston, depending on what their record are when they get to that point, that's going to be a really, really tough game. But I'm excited. I mean, the excitement is officially here. People can start planning their tailgates. People looking forward to homecoming and all those type of things. I'm excited. What game stood out to you?
I think you've got to circle the game with that against the Texas Longhorns. So I'm looking at the news release that the Cougars sent out. So that October 21 meeting will be the first time the Houston and Texas play since September 21, 2002. So by the time they meet, it will have been 21 years since the last time those two programs played on the gridiron, which is just absurd to think about. And it'll be the first time they'll be meeting as conference opponents since November 11th, 1995, going back to the Southwest Conference days. And Houston will be looking for their first win over Texans since November 9th, 1991. And I think boom D on YouTube that's watching on YouTube made a great point. UT will have a bye week the week before they play the Houston Cougars, so that's going to be big for them to be able to have that extra really weak to be able to prepare for the Houston Cougars. Lorenz 2238 on YouTube says this is a great schedule. I hope we were done with Thursday night games. So again, that's kind of an underrated game. I think it's pretty huge that thing's going to be at TDCU Stadium and not in West Virginia. Obviously, we know that that's where Dana Holgerson joined the Houston Cougars from. And that's where he was a head coach before that. And then obviously, of course, like you said, TCU, that's going to be big from the standpoint that it's going to be home. That's going to be the first ever home conference game in the Big 12. I'm sure it'll be a crazy atmosphere. I'm sure people will be excited for that game. I mean, if you're not excited for that, there's something wrong with you. How can you not? They were the finalists for the CFP this year. They were literally in the big game. They're going to be entering here at TDCU Stadium. That's probably the biggest opponent that Houston's hosted. I mean, going back to Louisville, what would you
Louisville.
say?
Yep. Yep. No, I was thinking exactly. And I think I agree with Louisville when Lamar Jackson came to town. I expect a similar atmosphere. That was the largest crowd, the most impactful crowd that I've seen at TDU Stadium, and I expect that same result. And I think that's something not only Houston fans should want to put out while entering the Big 12. I think the football players will be looking forward to actually having a real home crowd and be able to get that energy off of the crowd. And so hopefully Houston fans stick it out regardless of how the season transpires. You want to have that home field advantage. But I like that Thursday night game with West Virginia. I think that's a good game to be. I'm not sure if it's on prime time, but most likely Thursday games are prime time games because of it's a rematch between Hogerson and his former team that he used to coach. So I like that matchup. But for Houston, I think a lot of these interstate rivals, and not only in state, but pretty much every conference game, you got to look for it's a recruiting battle as well because
Yeah,
not only do you want to win as far as the bragging rights, but you want to win in regards to recruiting. Houston has been doing a really good job with not only recruiting in-state transfers, but also recruiting in-state high school players. So if they can have a successful season, a la TCU, I don't know if they go as far as TCU did in their first year under their new head coach, but they can have a successful season. I think that really, really will bode well going for in recruiting as well.
absolutely. Now, I think when we look at some of the underrated games, September 30th, Houston once again has to play Texas Tech, which has kind of been they've been the one common opponent the Cougars have seen from a Big 12 foe in the last few years. Now, we've talked about it at the beginning of this season when they were heading up to Lubbock. They have to travel once again to Lubbock to play the Red Raiders. That's been an opponent that's heading into the games. We both talked that the Houston Cougars should have been able to defeat Texas Tech. They haven't been able to do it. They
Yep.
came really close last year. It's going to be interesting to see who's at quarterback for the Houston Cougars. It might be a situation where Donovan Smith is starting for the Houston Cougars, who obviously a year ago when both of those teams met, Smith started in that game, but he was starting for the Red Raiders at that point. But at some point, you got to feel that's one school where there's already a bit of a rivalry just because of how frequent you've seen them in the past few years. At
Yeah.
some point, Houston's got to be able to defeat Texas Tech.
And this has to be well next year, next football season has to be the year. I mean, I think Houston has let them off the hook. I believe the last three games, in my opinion, they should have won those games. But to Texas Tech credit, they did what it took to win the games, and they actually won them. And so, I mean, Houston definitely has to get over the hump and beating Texas Tech. But like I've been saying, that's not a measuring stick game because Texas Tech, although under their new coach, I will say he's looking like he's changing the culture there. But still, for where they are and where Houston wants to be, you have to be able to beat a team like Texas Tech and a school like Tech who hasn't really done anything significant in college football or even the Big 12. And so you have to beat the teams that you feel like you should beat, and I feel like they should beat Texas Tech. But to their credit, I got to give credit where it's due. They have been beating the Cougars in the last, what, 3 or 4 games, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it's around there where they've had a 4 or 5 game losing streak to the Red Raiders. Now, of course, when it looks to our friends at the tailgate talks, they're already reacting to it. They said, "I will see you soon." So I'm sure we'll be able to collab for another show down the road with them, our good friends at Tailgates Talk. If you're looking for a Texas Tech podcast, obviously, of course, now going into the Big 12, you make sure that it's those guys because they do a great job at being able to cover Texas Tech in their way. Once again, that's at Tailgate Talks on Twitter, and they have their own Tailgate Talks podcast covering the Red Raiders now. Looking at the reactions from our YouTube live stream, Boom Boom Diaz is very nervous of our schedule, not knowing the quarterback situation. If we don't have a solid option, we might be in for a rough ride. And absolutely, right now, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of joy for the schedule because it's end of January, early February. Right now, everyone's 0-0. Everyone has an opportunity to be able to put last season behind them, and they still have a clean slate. Everyone feels good. Looking at the schedule, let's look at it a bit of, obviously we want to be objective, but even though they're going to be at home, opening against Texas Christian, that is going to be a tough game, especially because of how high the Horned Frogs have been able to get in terms of kind of the elite level they're coming off of this past season.
Yeah, but realistically, I have so much respect for the coach and the success that he's been able to attain, whether at SMU or at TCU. But they're replacing a lot of experience, specifically at the quarterback with Duggan. He's gone. Their best receiver Johnson is gone. Their running back Miller went to the draft, and so many players are on the defense. They're Thorpe Winter, Thomason, he's gone. So many players they're going to have to replace, and so we're not really sure what they're going to look like. They're going to be tested, I think, early in the matchup they have with Colorado, who Dion's first year is going to be a lot of hype around them, and so I think TCU. It will be some excitement because of the what they were able to accomplish this season, but I don't know if they have a repeat successful season like they had last year. If they do, I think we can see TCU probably being one in the upper echelon of the Big 12 for years to come, especially with the way they're able to recruit. But that's a really big game. I can't wait to see the matchup. I want to see Houston's quarterback position. I think that's the position to keep an eye on going throughout the spring, the fall, all the way up until the season starts. Who will win that quarterback battle?